Have you ever wondered how the fear of the supernatural led to one of the darkest periods in human history? Consider a time when the inexplicable was often attributed to malevolent forces, a time when fear and suspicion ran rampant. This was a time of witch trials, a grim chapter in history that's as intriguing as it is terrifying. Witch trials were not merely a series of court proceedings. They were a manifestation of mass paranoia, a societal panic that swept across continents, leaving devastation in its wake. At the heart of these trials was the belief in witchcraft, a supposed evil practice that involved making pacts with the devil to harm others. Such accusations were often based on hearsay, personal vendettas, or misconstrued observations. You might wonder why such a seemingly absurd notion gained so much traction. Well, the answer lies in the social and religious climate of the time. The world was still finding its feet in the realms of science and reason, and the supernatural provided an all too convenient scapegoat for the unexplained. Add to this a dash of religious fervor, and you have the perfect storm for a witch hunt. The trials, however, were not uniform in nature. They varied from place to place, from the infamous Salem witch trials in colonial America to the lesser-known but equally horrific Pendle witch trials in England. They were so widespread and varied that it's difficult to pin down a precise start or end date. This muddled timeline is part of what makes witch trials so enigmatic. The trials are shrouded in mystery, with plenty of unanswered questions and theories that only add to their intrigue. Why did they start? How did they spread so quickly and widely? And most importantly, how did they eventually come to an end? These are questions that historians and researchers have been grappling with for centuries. And while we may not have all the answers, we can certainly attempt to understand this bewildering phenomenon better. So let's delve into the past and unravel the mysteries of the witch trials. The inception of witch trials dates back to the 14th century. This was a time when society was deeply entrenched in religious beliefs, and anything that could not be explained was often attributed to supernatural forces. The 14th century was a period of significant societal change. Europe was recovering from the Black Death, a catastrophic pandemic that had wiped out a large portion of the population. As communities struggled to make sense of the calamity, they sought explanations, and unfortunately, they often found them in the form of scapegoats. The fear and uncertainty of these times created fertile ground for the beginnings of the witch trials. The role of the church was integral to the inception of witch trials. The church was a dominant force during the medieval period, wielding considerable influence over societal norms and beliefs. It was the church that first propagated the concept of witchcraft, associating it with heresy and devil worship. The Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches, was a manual for witch hunters published in 1486 by two German monks, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. Endorsed by the Catholic Church, it provided detailed instructions on how to identify, interrogate, and prosecute those suspected of witchcraft. The book played a significant role in spreading the fear of witches as it was widely disseminated across Europe. The societal climate at the time was ripe for such beliefs to take root. The population was largely uneducated, and scientific understanding of natural phenomena was limited. The concept of witches provided a convenient explanation for unexplained events such as crop failures, sudden illnesses, or even untimely deaths. Moreover, the trials served as a tool for social control. They were often manipulated to settle personal scores, to remove unwanted individuals, or to seize the property of the accused. Women in particular were disproportionately targeted, as they were seen as more susceptible to the devil's influence. But it wasn't just the societal and religious factors that led to the inception of the witch trials. The legal system also played a role. The introduction of the inquisitorial trial, where the accused was presumed guilty until proven innocent, made it extremely difficult for those accused of witchcraft to defend themselves. What began as isolated incidents soon spiraled into mass hysteria. The fear of witches spread like wildfire, and communities were gripped by paranoia. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and friends turned against friends. The trials were often public spectacles, with the community participating in the identification and punishment of the supposed witches. This was the start of a terrifying era, an era of fear and persecution. The witch trials would go on to claim thousands of lives over the next few centuries, leaving a dark stain on our history. But it's important to remember that they were a product of their time, a reflection of the fears and prejudices of a society struggling to make sense of a rapidly changing world. The fear of witches was not confined to a single region or country. Indeed, the witch trials spread like wildfire across Europe and later to the New World, propelled by a potent blend of mass hysteria, superstition, and religious fervor. In the late Middle Ages, the fear of witches began to take hold in Europe. A combination of societal changes, religious anxieties, and catastrophic events like the Black Death led many to look for scapegoats and explanations. Enter the witch, the perfect target for accusations and blame. As the 15th century dawned, the witch trials expanded from isolated incidents to a widespread phenomenon. In Germany, the epicenter of the early witch hunts, the trials were particularly brutal. Accused witches were often tortured into confessions, leading to a vicious cycle of more accusations and trials. From Germany, the trials spread to France, Switzerland, Scandinavia, and the British Isles. But it wasn't just the trials that spread. Along with them spread the fear, the panic, and the superstition. The trials became a catalyst for hysteria, as neighbors turned against neighbors, friends against friends. The mere whisper of witchcraft was enough to incite terror and suspicion. In the midst of this frenzy, the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, was published. This book, written by two Dominican monks, detailed how to identify, interrogate, and punish witches. It became a bestseller, further fueling the spread of witch trials and the fear surrounding them. As the 16th and 17th centuries rolled around, the trials crossed the Atlantic to the New World. The most well-known of these are the Salem witch trials. In 1692, in the small Puritan settlement of Salem, Massachusetts, a group of young girls began to exhibit strange, unexplained behaviors. They were soon diagnosed as bewitched, setting off a wave of hysteria that resulted in the execution of 20 people and the imprisonment of many more. But it wasn't just Salem. Witch trials took place in other parts of the New World as well, from Connecticut to Virginia. The fear of witches had become a part of the colonial psyche, a fear that was often manipulated by those in power to control and suppress dissent. What's striking about the spread of the witch trials is how they transcended boundaries. They weren't confined to one social class, one type of community, or even one continent. They were a global phenomenon, fueled by a potent mix of fear, superstition, and the human need to explain the unexplainable. Yet amidst the fear and the frenzy, there were voices of dissent. There were individuals and groups who questioned the trials, who pushed back against the hysteria. These voices were often silenced, marginalized, but they were there, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a spark of reason, a glimmer of light. The witch trials had become a global phenomenon, causing panic and fear wherever they went. But as we'll see in the next scene, the height of the witch trials was also the beginning of their end. For as quickly as the fear of witches spread, so too did the seeds of doubt, the whispers of dissent, the stirrings of change. The 17th century marked the height of the witch trials. Picture this, it's the year 1692, and the small village of Salem in Massachusetts becomes the epicenter of a phenomenon that would send shockwaves through history. Yes, we're talking about the infamous Salem witch trials. This was a time when fear, superstition, and hysteria held sway. A time when being different, being other, could cost you your life. The Salem witch trials began in a world gripped by fear. The puritanical worldview was one of constant spiritual warfare. The devil, they believed, walked among them, seeking to corrupt and destroy their godly society. When two young girls in Salem Village began to have fits and strange behaviors that the local doctor couldn't explain, the explanation was clear: witchcraft. And so began a period of hysteria and fear that would see more than 200 people accused of witchcraft. 19 would be hanged, one pressed to death, and several more would die in prison. The Salem witch trials had reached their terrifying peak, but how were these trials conducted? Well, the methods were as varied as they were terrifying. In some cases, the accused were subjected to physical examinations. Witches, it was believed, bore physical marks of their pact with the devil. These could be anything from moles to birthmarks, or even just unusual skin blemishes. Then there were the spectral evidence trials. It was believed that a witch could send out their specter, a ghostly version of themselves, to torment others. If someone claimed to see your specter when you had an alibi, it mattered not. The courts often accepted this as damning evidence of witchcraft. And let's not forget the infamous swimming test. The accused witch would be bound and thrown into a body of water. If they floated, they were a witch. If they sank, they were innocent. A chilling and cruel catch-22, if there ever was one. The punishments meted out were equally horrifying. Burning at the stake is perhaps the most well-known method of execution for witchcraft, but it was actually relatively rare. More common were hangings, like those that took place at Gallows Hill in Salem. Then there was the case of Giles Corey, who refused to enter a plea and was pressed to death under heavy stones. A grim fate indeed. These trials and punishments were not isolated incidents. They were symptomatic of a society gripped by fear and paranoia. The Salem witch trials, and others like it, were the manifestation of that fear. They were a horrifying spectacle of human cruelty, a stark reminder of what can happen when fear overrides reason. But the trials were not without their critics. Even in the midst of the hysteria, there were voices of reason. Some questioned the validity of spectral evidence, others the inhumane treatment of the accused. These voices were often drowned out by the clamor of fear, but they were there nonetheless, and eventually they would herald the beginning of the end for the witch trials. At their peak, the witch trials were a horrifying spectacle of human fear and cruelty. But they were also a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the dangers of fear and ignorance. And as we'll see in the next scene, they would eventually give way to a period of introspection and change. But that's a story for another day. Stay tuned. By the late 18th century, the fervor of the witch trials began to wane. This marked the beginning of the end of a dark chapter in human history, a time of fear, paranoia, and the cruel persecution of the innocent. But what caused this sudden shift? Let's delve into the factors that led to the end of the witch trials. The first major factor was a change in law. As the Enlightenment period dawned, legal systems across Europe and the New World began to evolve. The burden of proof became more stringent, demanding stronger evidence before a conviction could be secured. Hearsay and spectral evidence, once enough to condemn someone as a witch, were no longer deemed credible. This shift in legal practice made it much harder to convict someone of witchcraft, leading to a significant decrease in trials and executions. In addition to changes in law, scientific discovery played a crucial role in the end of the witch trials. The 18th century was a time of great scientific advancement. People began to seek rational explanations for phenomena once attributed to witchcraft. Illnesses, crop failures, and natural disasters, once blamed on witches, were now understood as natural occurrences or the result of disease. As science provided more and more answers, the need to blame witches for misfortune dwindled. But perhaps the most significant change was a shift in societal and religious beliefs. The Enlightenment brought with it a new way of thinking. Reason, logic, and individual rights took center stage, pushing aside the superstition and fear that had fueled the witch trials. In the religious sphere, the concept of witchcraft as a real and pervasive threat began to lose favor. Many religious leaders started to speak out against the trials, arguing that they were unchristian and unjust. Even though these factors contributed to the end of the witch trials, it's important to note that the transition was not immediate or uniform. In some areas, trials continued well into the 18th century, and beliefs in witchcraft persisted even longer. However, the tide was turning. The number of trials dropped sharply, and those accused were more often acquitted than convicted. The days of widespread witch hunts were coming to an end. While the end of the witch trials was undoubtedly a step forward for humanity, it wasn't without its complexities. The same Enlightenment thinking that helped end the trials also led to a troubling new trend: the medicalization of witchcraft. Instead of being seen as witches, those who would have been accused in the past were now often labeled as mentally ill. This shift, while ostensibly more humane, led to a new form of persecution. with asylums replacing the gallows. In the end, the witch trials didn't so much disappear as evolve. They transformed from a religious and legal phenomenon into a social and medical one. The fear of the unknown, the need to scapegoat, and the desire for control that had driven the trials remained, taking on new forms in the modern world. The era of witch trials had come to an end, but their impact was far from over. Even today, we can see echoes of the trials in our society, a haunting reminder of a time when fear and superstition could lead to unspeakable cruelty. But by understanding our past, we can strive to prevent such atrocities in the future. The witch trials left an indelible mark on society. This chilling period of human history, where fear and paranoia led to the persecution and execution of thousands, has echoed through the centuries, shaping our world in myriad ways. Let's first consider the impact on law. The witch trials were a manifestation of rampant injustice, with the balance of proof heavily skewed against the accused. The accused were presumed guilty until proven innocent, a stark inversion of the legal principle we hold dear today. These trials were often based on spectral evidence, a type of evidence based solely on dreams and visions. The widespread use and acceptance of such evidence during the witch trials highlighted the need for a more rational and evidence-based approach to justice. In the aftermath of the trials, societies began to question and challenge these unjust practices. The witch trials played a significant role in the development of the legal principle, innocent until proven guilty, and the rejection of spectral evidence. Today, our legal systems are built on these principles, ensuring justice is served based on tangible evidence and fair trials. The witch trials also left a profound impact on religion. During these trials, religious dogma was weaponized to justify the persecution of the alleged witches. This misuse of religion led to introspection and reform within religious institutions. Many began to advocate for a more compassionate and less dogmatic approach to faith, a shift that continues to influence religious thought and practice today. But the impact of the witch trials extends beyond law and religion. They have permeated our culture, shaping our literature, films, and even our language. The term witch hunt has come to symbolize any unfounded persecution or campaign against a person or group. It serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the importance of rational thought. The witch trials have also been immortalized in popular culture, from Arthur Miller's play The Crucible to the countless films and TV shows that explore the theme of witchcraft. These works serve as a stark reminder of the trials, allowing us to examine this dark period of our history from the safety of our living rooms. They provoke thought and discussion, prompting us to question our actions and beliefs, and to consider the potential consequences of unchecked fear and suspicion. Furthermore, the witch trials have relevance in our present day. They remind us of the dangers of scapegoating and the power of fear. They teach us how easily societies can turn on their own when faced with uncertainty and fear of the unknown. These lessons are particularly pertinent in our current age, where misinformation can spread like wildfire, and fear of the other can quickly escalate to persecution. The witch trials also serve as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the horror and injustice they faced, many of those accused maintained their innocence until the end, standing up against a society that had turned against them. Their courage continues to inspire us, reminding us of the power of truth and resilience in the face of adversity. In conclusion, the witch trials left a lasting legacy that continues to shape our world. They forced a reevaluation of legal and religious norms, inspired cultural and literary works, and continue to provide important lessons for our society. They remind us of the potential for injustice when fear overpowers reason, and the importance of standing up for truth and fairness. The witch trials, a dark chapter in our history, continue to shape our society in ways we may not even realize. The witch trials were a manifestation of fear, superstition, and the misuse of power. With these words, we have journeyed through the enigmatic and dark history of the witch trials, a period that casts a long shadow over our understanding of human nature and societal behavior. From the inception of the witch trials, we saw how the confluence of religious fervor, social pressures, and political manipulation created a perfect storm for persecution. The seed of suspicion was planted, and from it sprouted a vine of fear that entwined entire communities, causing panic and hysteria to ripple through society like a relentless wave. As we followed the spread of the witch trials across continents and centuries, the scale and intensity of this phenomenon became all too apparent. It was not just an isolated incident or a localized outbreak of fear. It was a global contagion, a mass delusion that gripped nations and turned neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. At the height of the witch trials, the machinery of persecution was in full force. The trials were not merely a display of power, but a systematic campaign of terror. Innocent lives were snuffed out, families torn apart, and communities devastated. The witch trials became a symbol of the destructive power of fear, bigotry, and ignorance. However, as the dawn breaks after the darkest night, so too did the end of the witch trials arrive. We learned how reason and enlightenment eventually prevailed, bringing an end to this grim chapter in human history. The trials ceased, but their impact reverberated through the ages, shaping laws, influencing literature, and leaving an indelible imprint on our collective consciousness. In assessing the impact of the witch trials, we noted how they serve as a stark reminder of the destructive potential of unchecked fear and power. They underscore the importance of skepticism, rationality, and the pursuit of truth in the face of fear-induced hysteria. As we reflect on these lessons, let's remember that history does not merely exist in the past. It lives in the present, shaping our actions, our beliefs, and our society. The witch trials are more than a historical curiosity. They are a cautionary tale, a warning from the past to the present and the future. Through understanding and acknowledging this dark period in our history, we can strive to prevent the repetition of such atrocities. We can foster a society that values reason over fear, compassion over persecution, and truth over superstition. As we look back at the witch trials, we are reminded of the power of fear and the importance of rational thought in shaping our society. Let's carry this awareness forward, using the lessons of the past to illuminate our path towards a more enlightened, compassionate, and just future.